Life keeps moving. Days turn into weeks. Weeks quietly turn into months. And one day, they wake up with a question that feels heavier than failure itself. Why hasn't anything changed? In this audiobook, The Skill That Changes Your Life, Discipline Over Motivation, you are not going to be entertained. You are going to be confronted, because the truth is simple and it cuts deep. Motivation will start your journey, but discipline is the only thing that will finish it. This is not about hype. This is not about temporary energy. And this is not about becoming someone else overnight. This is about building a version of you that does what must be done, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's boring, even when nobody is watching. Over the next chapters, you will learn something most people never fully understand. Why your life hasn't changed, even though you've tried. Why your first hour each day controls everything that follows. Why negotiating with yourself is destroying your self-respect. Why boredom is not your enemy, but your training ground. Why emotional control is a form of power. And why consistency will always outperform intensity. This is not theory. This is structure. This is a rebuild. And here is the one line you need to remember before we go any further. The life you want is built in the moments you don't feel like showing up. Let that sit with you, because everything changes once you understand that. And before we begin, understand this clearly. This audiobook is for educational and personal development purposes. It is not a promise of instant results. It is a system, one that only works if you do. So, if you're ready, not to feel motivated, but to become disciplined, then stay with me. Because Chapter 1 might change the way you see your entire life. Chapter 1, Why Your Life Hasn't Changed Yet. Nothing is wrong with you. That's where we need to start. Because most people carry a quiet belief that something inside them is broken. They think they need more confidence, more intelligence, more discipline, more motivation. But the truth is much simpler. Your life hasn't changed because your actions haven't changed. Not consistently, not long enough. You've learned things. You've listened to content. You've felt inspired for a few days, but inspiration is not transformation. You can understand everything and still stay exactly where you are, because information creates awareness, but discipline creates identity, and identity is what shapes your life. Think about it. If someone promises to wake up early and doesn't, what happens? Nothing dramatic. No alarms go off. No one punishes them. But something invisible shifts. A small crack forms in their self-trust. Now imagine that happening every day. I'll start tomorrow. I'll do it later. I just don't feel like it today. Each time, another crack. Until eventually, they stop believing themselves. And when you don't trust yourself, everything becomes harder. Confidence disappears. Focus weakens. Goals feel unrealistic. Not because you can't achieve them, but because deep down, you don't believe you'll follow through. This is where most people lose the game. Not in failure, but in broken self-agreements. The truth is, discipline is not about forcing your life into extremes. It's about keeping the smallest promises to yourself. That's where it begins. Not in big changes, in quiet consistency. Because every time you do what you said you would do, you rebuild something powerful. Self-respect. And self-respect changes everything. It changes how you walk into a room, how you handle pressure, how you speak, how you think. It raises your standards without you even noticing. Now let's be honest. Most people don't fail because they are lazy. They fail because their days slip away without intention. They wake up, react, scroll, respond, delay. And by the end of the day, they feel tired but unchanged. Sound familiar? That's not a discipline problem. That's an awareness problem, because time doesn't disappear. It gets spent unconsciously. And the scariest part? It feels normal. That's why years can pass without progress. Not because something went wrong, but because nothing was decided. So let me ask you something. Not what you tell people, not what you post, not what you plan, but honestly, how are you really living? What do your mornings look like? What do your habits say about you? What do your actions prove, not your intentions? Because your life right now is a reflection of what you tolerate daily. Not what you dream about, not what you say you want, but what you allow. And here's the shift most people avoid. If you created your current reality, you can also rebuild it. That's not blame. That's power. It means you don't have to wait. You don't need permission. You don't need the right time. You need a decision, a real one, because nothing changes until something becomes non-negotiable. And discipline begins the moment you stop asking yourself, do I feel like it? And start telling yourself, this is what I do now. That's the turning point. Not motivation, not excitement, identity. You become someone who shows up, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's boring, even when it's hard. Because here's the truth, no one says clearly enough. Your future is built in ordinary hours used well, not in big moments, not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in small, repeated actions, done without applause. That's where your life changes, quietly, slowly, then suddenly. So if this is already hitting you, if you're starting to recognize yourself in these patterns, then don't just listen. Decide something right now, because awareness without action is just another delay. And if this message resonates with you, take a second and commit to it. Not to me, to yourself, like a contract. Because discipline starts the moment you stop escaping your own potential. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about something even more dangerous than laziness, something that looks harmless, but silently destroys your discipline every single day. Dear friend, we are just starting to work on this channel, so your likes and subscriptions will greatly help us grow. Don't be indifferent. Thank you. Chapter 2. The Hidden Habit That Destroys Discipline. There is something quietly controlling your life right now. It doesn't look dangerous. It doesn't feel like failure, and most people never question it. But it is the reason discipline keeps slipping through your hands. It's called negotiation. Not with other people, with yourself. You wake up and the alarm goes off. In that moment, there is a decision. Simple, clear. Get up or stay in bed. But instead of deciding, you start negotiating. 5 more minutes. I'll start tomorrow. I didn't sleep well. I deserve a break. And just like that, you lose, not the day, something deeper, authority, because every time you negotiate with yourself, you teach your mind one thing. Your word is flexible. And once your word becomes flexible, discipline becomes impossible. Think about it. If someone else made a commitment to you and broke it every day, would you trust them? Of course not. So why do you expect yourself to trust you when you keep doing the same thing? This is where discipline actually breaks. Not in big decisions, in small negotiations. Most people believe discipline means doing hard things, but that's not the full truth. Discipline means removing the conversation. No debate, no emotional voting, no delay, just action. Because the moment you start negotiating, your emotions enter the decision. And emotions are not reliable. They change constantly. They depend on sleep, mood, stress, weather, distractions. If you follow how you feel, you will never be consistent. And consistency is the only thing that builds results. So let's make this clear. You don't lose discipline because you're weak. You lose discipline because you keep giving yourself options. And options create escape. Imagine this. Two people wake up early. One asks, "Do I feel like it today?" The other says, "This is what I do." Same action. Completely different identity. The first person depends on motivation. The second person relies on standards, and standards don't change based on mood. This is why some people seem unstoppable, not because they are always motivated, but because they stopped asking themselves for permission. They removed the question. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because you already know what you need to do. You don't need another video. You don't need another plan. You don't need more information. You need execution. But execution feels heavy when your mind is used to escaping. That's why negotiation feels so natural. It protects comfort. It avoids effort. It delays responsibility. But it also keeps your life exactly where it is. So the real question is not, how do I become more disciplined? It's, where am I still negotiating? Because those moments are the exact places your life is stuck. Maybe it's waking up. Maybe it's going to the gym. Maybe it's focusing on work instead of distractions. Maybe it's having difficult conversations. Maybe it's finally starting something you've been delaying for months or years. Every time you say later, you're not delaying the task. You're weakening your identity, and identity is everything. Because once you see yourself as someone who delays, you will keep proving it. That's how the mind works. It protects consistency, even if that consistency is holding you back. So if you want to change your life, you have to change the pattern. Starting with this, stop negotiating with the version of you that wants comfort over growth. That voice will always exist. It will always have a reason. It will always sound convincing. But it is not your authority. It is your resistance. And discipline is built when you stop listening to it, not once, but repeatedly. This is where real strength is developed, not in perfect routines, not in extreme effort, but in quiet decisions, where you act instead of debate. Now let me give you something practical. The next time you catch yourself negotiating, pause and ask one question. If I keep choosing this, who am I becoming? Not tomorrow, not someday, today. Because every small decision is a vote, and your identity is the result of those votes. You are not built in big moments. You are built in patterns. So if you want to become disciplined, you don't need to do more. You need to remove the option to quit. That's it. Make certain actions non-negotiable. Wake up when you said you would. Start when you planned to. Finish what you committed to, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's imperfect. Because discipline is not about perfection. It's about reliability. And the moment you become reliable to yourself, everything changes. Your confidence rises, your focus sharpens, your standards increase, and suddenly, the things that once felt hard become normal. That's the shift. That's the moment discipline stops feeling forced and starts becoming who you are. But here's the part most people don't expect. Even when you remove negotiation, even when you start showing up, there is something else waiting for you, something that feels even more uncomfortable than effort, something most people run from immediately. And it's the reason they go back to distraction. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the one thing discipline requires that almost no one is willing to face. Chapter 3, The Discipline of Boredom. There is a moment that breaks most people. It's not failure. It's not pressure. It's not even difficulty. It's boredom. That quiet, uncomfortable space where nothing is exciting, nothing is urgent, nothing is stimulating, and everything that matters still needs to be done. This is where discipline is decided, because the truth is, most people don't avoid hard work. They avoid boring work. They want intensity. They want progress they can feel. They want results they can see. But real transformation, it's repetitive, it's quiet, it's often unremarkable. And that's exactly why people quit. They don't fail because they can't do the work. They fail because they can't stay with the work when it stops feeling interesting. Think about it. The first few days of change feel powerful. New routine, new mindset, new energy. You feel focused. You feel in control. You feel like this time it's different. But then it becomes normal, and normal feels boring. That's when your mind starts searching for escape. Scroll a little, check something, take a break, switch tasks. Not because you need to, but because your brain is addicted to stimulation. This is the real battle. Not discipline versus laziness, but discipline versus distraction. And distraction always wins when you haven't trained yourself to tolerate boredom. Because boredom exposes something most people try to avoid: stillness. And in stillness, there is no dopamine, no instant reward, no excitement, just you and the task. That's uncomfortable, so people escape, they switch, they delay, they multitask, and they call it productivity. But it's not. It's avoidance, and the cost is invisible. Every time you escape boredom, you train your brain to quit when things slow down. You reduce your ability to focus. You weaken your discipline. And over time, even simple tasks feel harder. That's why you can sit for hours scrolling, but struggle to focus for 20 minutes on something important. It's not because you lack ability. It's because your attention has been conditioned. And discipline is the act of taking that control back. So here's the shift. You have to stop seeing boredom as a problem and start seeing it as training. Because boredom is where your focus is built. It's where your mind learns to stay. It's where your discipline becomes real, not when you feel like it, but when you don't, and you continue anyway. That's the difference. Anyone can act when they feel motivated. Very few can stay when it feels empty. Now let's bring this into your life. Think about the last time you tried to focus. Really focus. How long did it take before you reached for your phone? How long before your mind started drifting? How long before you told yourself, "I'll do this later"? That's not random. That's conditioning. And if you don't change it, it will follow you into every area of your life. Your work, your goals, your relationships, your growth. Because everything meaningful requires sustained attention. And sustained attention requires comfort with boredom. So how do you build it? You don't start with extremes. You start with awareness. Next time you feel the urge to escape, don't move immediately. Pause. Sit in that discomfort, even for 30 seconds, then a minute, then longer. Because what you're doing in that moment is retraining your brain. You're teaching it, I don't need constant stimulation to function. That's power. And over time, that small shift changes everything. You become more focused, more present, more in control. Tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable because your mind is no longer running away. Now here's something important. Boredom is not the absence of progress. It's the environment where progress is built. The repetition, the silence, the lack of excitement. That's where mastery lives. Athletes experience it. Writers experience it. Entrepreneurs experience it. Anyone who has built something meaningful has spent hours in boredom. Not because they enjoyed it, but because they understood it. They understood that excitement is temporary, but discipline is built in repetition. So instead of asking, how do I stay motivated? Start asking, how do I stay when it's boring? That question will change your life. Because if you can stay when it's quiet, when it's repetitive, when it's uncomfortable, you become unstoppable, not emotionally, but structurally. And structure always wins. Now let me leave you with this. Boredom is not where you lose. It's where most people quit, and you don't. That's the difference. That's the edge. That's discipline. And if this is hitting you right now, if you're starting to recognize how often you escape instead of stay, then don't ignore it. Use it. Make one small change today. Stay 5 minutes longer than you usually would. Focus just a little deeper. Resist just one urge to escape. That's how it starts. Quiet, simple, but powerful. Because every time you stay, you become someone who doesn't quit easily. And that identity changes everything. But even if you master boredom, even if you stop negotiating, even if you start showing up consistently, there is still one thing that can break your discipline instantly. Something invisible, something emotional, something that most people never learn to control. In the next chapter, we're going to face it directly. Chapter 4, Emotional Discipline. The skill no one teaches. There is something stronger than laziness, stronger than distraction, stronger than lack of motivation, and it's the reason most people lose momentum, even after they start. It's emotion, not emotion itself, but the inability to control it. Because here's the truth most people never learn. You don't break discipline because you don't know what to do. You break discipline because you don't feel like doing it. And feelings are powerful. They can convince you to stop, to delay, to quit. They can make comfort feel like a reward and effort feel like punishment. That's why emotional discipline is everything. Because without it, every plan you create is fragile. Think about your own life. How many times have you started something with full intention only to stop because of how you felt? Too tired, too stressed, too overwhelmed, too distracted. And in the moment, it felt justified. It always does. But here's the pattern. Feel something, then react, then delay, then repeat. That loop keeps people stuck for years, not because they don't want more, but because they let temporary emotions control permanent decisions. And the dangerous part? It feels normal, because most people live like this. They wake up and ask, how do I feel today? And based on that answer, they decide how much effort they give. But discipline doesn't work like that. Discipline ignores the emotional vote. It doesn't ask how you feel. It asks what needs to be done. That's the shift from emotional living to intentional living. Now let's be clear. You are not trying to eliminate emotion. That's impossible. And it's not the goal. The goal is to stop letting emotion make your decisions. because emotions are temporary, but your actions create long-term consequences. So when you say, I don't feel like it today, what you're really saying is, I'm letting a temporary state control my future. That's the cost. And once you see it like that, it becomes harder to ignore. Because discipline is not about being emotionless. It's about acting in spite of emotion. You feel tired and you show up. You feel distracted and you focus. You feel unmotivated and you begin anyway. That's power, quiet power. Now here's where most people struggle. They think emotional discipline means forcing themselves aggressively, pushing harder, being extreme, ignoring everything. But that's not sustainable. Real emotional discipline is calm, it's controlled, it's steady. It sounds like this. I don't feel like doing this, but I'm doing it anyway. No drama, no anger, no resistance, just decision. And the more you practice that, the stronger you become. Because you start separating feeling from action. You stop reacting. You start choosing. Now let's go deeper. There are 3 emotional states that destroy discipline the most: stress, doubt, and comfort. Stress tells you to escape. Doubt tells you you're not ready. Comfort tells you to stay where you are. And if you listen to all 3, you never move forward. So discipline requires something different: awareness. You have to notice the emotion without obeying it. That's the skill, not avoiding it, not fighting it, but seeing it clearly and continuing anyway. Imagine this. You're about to do something important: work, study, training, and suddenly you feel resistance. Your mind says, do it later. Instead of reacting, you pause. You recognize the feeling, and you say, this is discomfort, not danger. Then you act anyway. That moment is where discipline is built, not in ease, in resistance. Because every time you act despite emotion, you take back control, and over time, your emotional reactions lose power. They don't disappear, but they stop controlling you. That's freedom. Now here's something important. Emotional discipline is not built in perfect conditions. It's built in real life, on bad days, on stressful days, on days when everything feels off. That's where it matters most, because anyone can be disciplined when life is smooth. But when things get difficult, that's when your true standard is revealed. So don't wait for the perfect mood. Don't wait to feel ready, because ready is not a feeling, it's a decision. And every time you choose action over emotion, you strengthen that decision. Now let me give you a simple rule. When emotion rises, lower your expectations. But don't lower your standards. That means maybe you don't perform perfectly, maybe you don't go all out, but you still show up. You still do something, because consistency matters more than intensity. Always. Now take a moment and reflect. Where in your life are you letting emotion control your actions? Where are you stopping instead of continuing? Where are you waiting instead of deciding? Because those moments are the exact places your discipline is being tested. And the good news? Every one of them is an opportunity to rebuild control, one decision at a time. Because discipline is not something you have. It's something you practice, daily, quietly, consistently. And if you do that long enough, you become someone who is no longer controlled by how they feel. You become someone who leads themselves, and that changes everything. But there's another layer to this, because even if you control your emotions, even if you stop negotiating, even if you learn to stay through boredom, there is still something that can slowly destroy your discipline without you even noticing. Something subtle, something that feels harmless, but over time, it drains your focus, your energy, and your direction. In the next chapter, we're going to uncover it. Dear viewers, write which city you're from. It's interesting to see which corners of the world are watching our videos. Chapter 5. The Silent Drain on Your Discipline. There is something slowly weakening your discipline every single day. It doesn't feel like failure. It doesn't look like a mistake. And most people never question it. But it's there, quietly draining your focus, your energy, and your direction. It's distraction. Not just obvious distraction, not just scrolling or wasting time, but constant low-level noise, the kind that fills every empty moment, the kind that keeps your mind busy, but never moving forward. Because here's the truth, you don't lose discipline in big moments, you lose it in small, repeated distractions. Think about your day. How often do you check your phone without thinking? How often do you switch tasks before finishing one? How often do you sit down to focus and end up somewhere else? It feels harmless. Just a few seconds, just a quick check, just a small break. But those moments add up, and more importantly, they train your mind to avoid depth, because every time you interrupt your focus, you weaken your ability to stay. And discipline requires staying. That's the connection most people miss. They think discipline is about effort, but it's actually about attention. Where your attention goes, your life follows. And if your attention is constantly pulled, your progress will always feel slow, fragmented, unfinished. Now let's go deeper. Distraction is not random. It's designed. Every app, every notification, every piece of content is competing for your attention, and it's winning. Not because you're weak, but because it's engineered to be addictive. Short bursts of stimulation, endless scrolling, constant novelty. Your brain starts expecting it, and once that expectation is built, real work feels harder, slower, less rewarding. That's why you can spend hours consuming, but struggle to create. Why you can jump between tasks, but struggle to finish one. Why you feel busy, but not productive. Because your attention has been trained to move, not to stay. And discipline requires the opposite: stillness, focus, depth. So if you want to rebuild discipline, you have to protect your attention, not occasionally, daily. Because attention is your most valuable resource, more than time, more than energy. Because without attention, you can't use either. Now here's where it becomes real. You don't need to eliminate all distractions. That's unrealistic. But you do need to control when they happen. That's the difference. Reactive versus intentional. Most people live reactively. Notification leads to check. Thought leads to follow. Impulse leads to act. No filter, no structure, just reaction. But discipline creates a gap, a moment between impulse and action. And in that moment, you choose. That's control. So instead of asking, how do I avoid distractions? Ask this: when do I allow them? Because if you don't decide, they will decide for you. Now let's make it practical. Start with one simple rule. When you're working on something important, remove the easy escape. Put your phone away. Close unnecessary tabs. Create an environment that supports focus, not perfectly, but intentionally. Because environment shapes behavior more than willpower ever will, and once you do that, you'll notice something. At first, it feels uncomfortable. Your mind will look for stimulation. It will get restless. It will try to pull you away. That's normal. That's withdrawal. Not from something physical, but from constant distraction. And this is where most people quit. They think something is wrong. They think they can't focus. But the truth is, they've just never trained it. Because focus is not something you have. It's something you build. And it's built the same way as discipline. Through repetition, through resistance, through staying. So the next time you feel that urge to check, to switch, to escape, pause and stay just a little longer, even if it's uncomfortable, because that moment is where your attention is being rebuilt. And every time you win that moment, you become stronger, more focused, more disciplined. Now here's something powerful. When you control your attention, you control your time. And when you control your time, you control your life, because time is not just hours. It's how those hours are used, and distraction steals that silently. So if you feel like you're always busy, but not moving forward, this is where to look. Not at your effort, at your focus. Because discipline is not just about doing more. It's about doing what matters without interruption. Now take a moment. Be honest with yourself. Where is your attention going daily? What are you feeding your mind? What are you allowing to interrupt your progress? Because whatever you tolerate becomes your standard, and your standard determines your results. So if you want to build discipline, raise the standard, protect your attention, guard your focus, because without it, nothing else holds. And if this chapter made you aware of something, don't ignore it. Make one change, just one. Remove one distraction. Create one focused block of time. Protect it and see what happens. Because small changes in attention create massive changes in direction. But even if you master your focus, even if you control your attention, there is still something deeper, something internal, that can either strengthen your discipline or quietly destroy it from within. And most people don't even realize it's happening. In the next chapter, we're going to uncover that layer. Chapter 6, Identity, the root of your discipline. There is a deeper layer beneath your habits, beneath your routines, beneath your goals, beneath your effort. And if you don't understand it, you will keep starting over again and again and again. That layer is identity. Because here's the truth most people never fully realize. You don't act based on what you want. You act based on who you believe you are. Let that sink in, because it explains everything. Why you start and stop. Why you promise and break it. Why you plan, but don't follow through. It's not a lack of knowledge. It's a mismatch in identity. You say you want to be disciplined, but deep down, you still see yourself as someone who delays. You say you want to be focused, but internally, you believe you get distracted easily. And your actions, they follow that belief every time. Because your mind is always trying to stay consistent with who you think you are, even if that version of you is holding you back. That's why change feels hard. Not because the actions are impossible, but because they conflict with your current identity. So when you try to do something different, your mind resists, not consciously, but automatically. It pulls you back to what feels familiar. That's why people say, I always go back to my old habits. Of course they do, because they never changed the identity behind them. They tried to force new actions on an old self-image, and that never lasts. So if you want real discipline, you don't start with habits. You start with identity. You start by asking a different question, not what should I do, but who do I need to become? Because once that becomes clear, your actions begin to align. Now here's the important part. Identity is not built in your head. It's built through evidence, small, repeated proof. Every time you act in a certain way, you cast a vote. And over time, those votes become belief. So if you want to become disciplined, you don't wait until you feel like that person. You start acting like them immediately, even in small ways. You wake up when you said you would. That's a vote. You focus when it's difficult. That's a vote. You finish what you started. That's a vote. And those votes stack day after day until one day you don't have to force it anymore because it becomes natural. That's identity shift, quiet, invisible, but powerful. Now let's be honest. Most people are waiting for a feeling. They think, once I feel confident, I'll act. Once I feel ready, I'll begin. Once I feel disciplined, I'll commit. But it works the opposite way. You act first. Then the identity follows. Because confidence is built through action. Discipline is built through repetition. And identity is built through proof, not thoughts. So if you're waiting to feel different, you'll stay the same. But if you start acting differently, even before it feels natural, everything begins to shift. Now here's where it becomes real. You don't need to change everything at once. You just need to start aligning your actions with the person you want to become. Ask yourself, what would a disciplined person do right now? Not in theory, in this exact moment. Would they delay or begin? Would they distract themselves or focus? Would they quit or continue? And then do that, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels unnatural, because that discomfort is the gap between who you are and who you're becoming. And the more you step into that gap, the faster you grow. Now here's something powerful. Identity is not something you find. It's something you build deliberately, through action, through repetition, through consistency. And the best part, you don't need permission. You don't need validation. You don't need anyone else to agree. Because this is internal, this is yours. And once it shifts, everything else follows. Your habits become easier, your focus becomes stronger, your discipline becomes stable, not because you're forcing it, but because it's who you are. Now take a moment, be honest. Who do you currently believe you are? Not what you say, not what you want, but what your actions prove. Because that identity is shaping your entire life. And if you don't like it, good. That means you can change it. One decision at a time, one action at a time, one vote at a time, because every moment is an opportunity to become someone new. Not instantly, but gradually. And that gradual shift is what creates permanent change. But even if you understand identity, even if you start acting differently, there is still something that can break your discipline in ways that feel justified, something that sounds reasonable, something that feels harmless. But over time, it keeps you stuck. In the next chapter, we're going to expose it. Chapter 7, The Lie That Keeps You Stuck. There is a sentence people tell themselves every day. It sounds reasonable, it feels justified, and it quietly destroys discipline. I'll start tomorrow. Not today. Not now. Tomorrow. And the dangerous part? It feels productive. It feels like a plan. But it's not. It's a delay disguised as intention. Because tomorrow is the safest place to put responsibility. It has no pressure, no urgency, no consequence. You can promise anything to tomorrow. Wake up early, work harder, be focused, be disciplined, and for a moment, it feels good, like you've made a decision. But nothing has changed, because real change only happens in the present, and tomorrow never arrives as a different version of today. It arrives with the same habits, the same mindset, the same patterns. So if you delay today, you will delay tomorrow, and the cycle continues. That's how people stay stuck for years, not because they don't want change, but because they keep postponing it. Now let's go deeper. Why do we do this? Why do we delay, even when we know it's hurting us? Because delay removes discomfort. It allows you to avoid effort without feeling like you've quit. You're not saying I won't do it. You're saying I will later. And that feels better. But it's a trap, because every time you delay, you weaken your ability to act. You train your mind to believe there's always more time. But there isn't. Time is not something you have later. It's something you either use or lose. And discipline is built in how you use it. Now here's the truth most people avoid. You don't need more time, you need more honesty. Because if something truly matters, you don't delay it endlessly. You act on it, even in small ways, even imperfectly. But you begin. So the real issue is not time, it's priority. What you delay reveals what you don't truly value yet. That's uncomfortable, but it's real. Because when something becomes important enough, you don't negotiate, you don't wait, you move. So if you keep saying tomorrow, ask yourself, why not now? Not in a harsh way, but in an honest one. Because that question removes the illusion. It forces clarity. And clarity leads to action. Now let's make this practical. Think of something you've been delaying. Something small. Something you know you should do. Not someday. Now. And instead of planning it, do the first step immediately. Right after this. No preparation, no overthinking, no perfect conditions, just action. Because discipline is not built in planning, it's built in starting. And starting is where most people get stuck. They want clarity before action, confidence before effort, motivation before movement. But it doesn't work like that. Action creates clarity. Action builds confidence. Action generates momentum, not the other way around. So if you wait, you lose. Not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, until delay becomes your identity. And once that happens, everything feels harder. Now here's something important. You don't need to eliminate delay completely. You need to reduce it. Shorten the gap between knowing and doing. That's the goal. Because the shorter that gap becomes, the stronger your discipline gets. So instead of saying, I'll do it later, say, I'll start now, even if it's small. That shift changes everything, because starting is the hardest part. Not continuing, not finishing, starting. And once you begin, resistance decreases, momentum builds, focus improves. That's how discipline grows. Not in big commitments, in small beginnings. Now let me give you a line to remember. The moment you say tomorrow, you give today away, and today is all you ever have. So use it. Even imperfectly, even briefly, but use it. Because every time you act now, you become someone who doesn't wait. And someone who doesn't wait wins. Not instantly, but inevitably. Now take a moment. Where are you still saying tomorrow? Where are you delaying what you know matters? Where are you choosing comfort over action? Because those moments are your opportunity, not to plan, but to move. And the next time that thought appears, I'll do it later, recognize it, and replace it with something stronger now. Just that. Simple, clear, immediate. Because discipline lives in the present, not in the future. But even if you stop delaying, even if you start acting immediately, there is still something that can slowly pull you back, without you even realizing it. Something external, something social, something that affects your standards more than you think. In the next chapter, we're going to uncover it. Chapter 8, The Environment That Shapes You. There is something influencing your discipline right now, and you might not even see it. It's not your mindset. It's not your habits. It's not your motivation. It's your environment. The people around you, the content you consume, the standards you're exposed to daily. Because here's the truth most people underestimate. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your environment. Let that settle, because it explains why discipline feels easy in some moments and impossible in others. Think about it. If you're surrounded by distraction, you become distracted. If you're surrounded by low standards, your standards drop. If you're surrounded by people who delay, complain, and avoid, you start doing the same, not intentionally, but gradually, silently. Because your brain is always adapting. It looks around and asks, what is normal here? And whatever it sees repeatedly, it accepts. That becomes your baseline. So if your environment is filled with inconsistency, discipline will always feel unnatural. But if your environment supports focus, supports growth, supports action, discipline becomes easier, not effortless, but easier. That's the shift. Now here's where it becomes uncomfortable, because you don't always notice the influence. It's subtle. It's in conversations. It's in habits. It's in what people tolerate around you. And over time, it shapes you. So, if you want to build discipline, you have to become aware of your environment, not just physically, mentally, digitally, emotionally. Ask yourself, what am I surrounding myself with daily? What am I listening to? What am I watching? Who am I spending time with? Because all of it matters, more than you think. Now let's go deeper. You don't need a perfect environment. You need an intentional one. That's the difference, because waiting for perfect conditions is just another form of delay. But creating better conditions, that's action. So start small. Change what you can control. Your workspace, your routines, your inputs. Remove what weakens you. Add what strengthens you, even in small ways. Because environment works in accumulation. Tiny influences, repeated daily. That's what shapes behavior. Now here's something powerful. You can design your environment to support discipline, not through force, but through structure. For example, if your phone is always next to you, you will check it. Not because you're weak, because it's there. So move it. If distractions are easy to access, you will use them. So create friction, make distractions harder, and focus easier. That's strategy, not willpower. And strategy always wins long term. Now let's talk about people, because this is where it gets real. The people around you set the standard you unconsciously follow. If they settle, you will feel comfortable settling. If they avoid growth, you will feel resistance when you try to grow, not because they're bad, but because it creates tension, and most people avoid tension, so they go back to what's normal. That's why growth often feels lonely, because when you raise your standards, you step outside the environment that shaped you, and that's uncomfortable, but necessary, because you cannot build a different life while staying in the same patterns. So sometimes discipline requires distance, not permanently, not aggressively, but intentionally. Less time in environments that weaken you, more time in environments that challenge you, even if it's just through what you consume. Books, content, ideas. Because what you feed your mind becomes your perspective, and your perspective shapes your actions. Now here's the key. You don't need everyone to understand your growth. You just need to protect it. Quietly, consistently, without needing approval. Because discipline is personal. It's not about proving something to others. It's about becoming someone for yourself. And that requires boundaries, not loud ones, clear ones. Now take a moment. Look at your environment honestly. Where is it supporting you? Where is it holding you back? Where are you making things harder than they need to be? Because once you see it, you can change it. And small changes in environment create big changes in behavior. Now let me give you a line to remember. You don't become disciplined in chaos. You become disciplined in structure. So build that structure piece by piece, day by day. Because when your environment supports your actions, discipline becomes sustainable, not just possible, but natural. And once that happens, you stop relying on willpower and start relying on systems. That's the upgrade. But even with the right environment, even with strong identity, even with control over your attention, there is still something that determines whether you continue or slowly fall back into old patterns. Something internal, something quiet, something most people ignore until it's too late. In the next chapter, we're going to uncover it. Dear viewer, we strive to create high-quality videos for you. Please assist us in improving our efforts by commenting on what you like about the video and what you would change or add. We would be very grateful. Chapter 9. The Standard You Live By. There is one thing that quietly controls everything in your life. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention, but it determines your results with absolute precision. Your standard, not your goals, not your intentions, not your plans, your standard. Because here's the truth. You don't get what you want. You get what you tolerate. Let that sit with you. Because it explains why discipline feels inconsistent, why you start strong and then slowly fade, why you know what to do, but don't always do it. It's not confusion, it's tolerance. Because every time you allow something below your potential, you lower your standard. Every time you skip what matters, delay what's important, accept less than you're capable of, you reinforce that standard, and over time, it becomes normal. That's the danger, not one bad decision, but repeated acceptance. Because your mind adapts quickly. What once felt like a mistake starts to feel like routine, and once it becomes routine, it becomes your identity. That's how people stay stuck without realizing it, not because they don't want more, but because they've become comfortable with less. Now here's where it gets real. Your standard is not what you say. It's what you consistently allow. So you can say, I want to be disciplined. But if you tolerate distraction, delay, excuses, that is your real standard, and your life will reflect that every time. So if you want to change your life, you don't start with motivation. You raise your standard. You decide this is no longer acceptable, not emotionally, not temporarily, but permanently. Because once something becomes unacceptable, your behavior changes automatically. You don't negotiate, you don't justify, you act. Think about it. There are things in your life you don't tolerate. certain behaviors, certain standards, certain lines you don't cross, and because of that, you don't struggle with them. There's no debate, no internal conflict, just clarity. That's what you need to build in your discipline. Now here's the shift. Stop asking, how do I stay consistent? Start asking, what am I no longer willing to tolerate? Because that question creates boundaries, and boundaries create structure, and structure creates discipline. Now, let's bring this into your daily life. If you tolerate waking up late, you will continue waking up late. If you tolerate distraction, you will continue being distracted. If you tolerate inconsistency, you will continue starting and stopping. That's how standards work. They are enforced through repetition, not intention. So if you want to change your standard, you have to enforce it daily, quietly, without exceptions. Not perfectly, but consistently. Because consistency is what locks it in. Now here's something important. Raising your standard doesn't mean becoming extreme. It means becoming honest. Honest about what you're allowing. Honest about what you're avoiding. Honest about what you're capable of. Because once you see the gap between where you are and where you could be, it becomes harder to ignore. That's awareness. And awareness creates pressure, not negative pressure, but necessary pressure, the kind that pushes you forward. Now let me give you a powerful shift. Instead of asking, what do I feel like doing today? Ask, what does my standard require today? That question removes emotion. It removes negotiation. It creates clarity, and clarity leads to action. Because discipline is not about forcing yourself endlessly. It's about living by a standard that doesn't change based on mood. Now take a moment. What is your current standard? Not your ideal, your real one. What do your actions say? What do your habits prove? Because that standard is shaping your entire life. And if you don't like it, good. That means you can change it, but only through action, not intention. So start small. Raise one standard, just one. Maybe it's waking up on time. Maybe it's focusing for a set period. Maybe it's finishing what you start. And then protect it. No negotiation, no excuses, just repetition. Because once that standard becomes stable, you can raise another. That's how transformation happens. Not all at once, but step by step. Standard by standard. Now let me leave you with this. Your life changes the moment your standards become stronger than your excuses. That's the turning point. That's the shift. That's discipline. But even when you raise your standards, even when you enforce them daily, there is still one thing that determines whether you sustain it or slowly drift back. Something deeper, something internal, something that decides whether you stay consistent or fall apart under pressure. In the next chapter, we're going to face it directly. Chapter 10. Pressure, the moment truth is revealed. There is a version of you that only appears under pressure, not when things are easy, not when everything is going your way, not when motivation is high, but when it's hard, when you're tired, when things go wrong, when nothing feels smooth. That's when your real discipline shows. Because here's the truth. You don't rise to your goals under pressure. You fall to your habits. And if your habits are weak, pressure exposes it immediately. This is where most people break. Not because they don't care, but because they haven't trained for resistance. They've trained in comfort. They've built routines around good days. But life is not built on good days. It's built on consistency through difficult ones. And if your discipline only exists when things feel right, It's not discipline. It's convenience. Now think about your own life. How do you respond when things get difficult? Do you stay consistent or do you pull back? Do you continue or do you pause? Do you stay focused or do you escape? Because those moments are the truth, not your plans, not your intentions. Your response under pressure defines your standard, and your standard defines your life. Now here's the shift. You have to stop seeing pressure as something negative and start seeing it as training. Because pressure is not there to break you, it's there to reveal you. It shows you exactly where your discipline stands. No illusion, no excuses, just reality. And once you see that, you can improve it. Now let's go deeper. There are two types of people under pressure, the ones who react and the ones who respond. Reaction is emotional, immediate, uncontrolled, automatic. Response is intentional, calm, delayed, chosen, and discipline lives in the response. Because when pressure hits, you will feel something: stress, frustration, doubt. That's normal. But what you do next, that's the difference. Do you follow the feeling or do you follow the standard? That's the question. Because if you follow the feeling, you escape, you delay, you quit. But if you follow the standard, you continue, even if it's slower, even if it's imperfect, even if it's uncomfortable. You stay. And that's what builds real discipline. Now here's something powerful. You don't need to be perfect under pressure. You need to be consistent. That's it. Because consistency under pressure creates strength, mental strength, emotional strength, behavioral strength. And once that strength is built, pressure stops feeling overwhelming. It becomes normal. That's when you become dangerous. Not because you're fearless, but because you're stable. Now let's make this practical. The next time you feel pressure, pause. Not long, just enough to create awareness. And ask yourself, what does my standard require right now? Not what you feel, not what's easy, what your standard demands. Then act on that, even in a small way, because under pressure, small actions matter more than big ones. They keep you moving. They maintain momentum, and momentum is everything. Now here's something most people miss. Pressure doesn't create weakness. It exposes it. So if you break under pressure, it's not failure, it's feedback. It shows you where you need to grow, where your discipline needs reinforcement, where your habits need strengthening. That's valuable if you use it. Because most people ignore it. They avoid pressure, they escape discomfort, they stay in safe zones. And because of that, they never grow. They never build resilience. They never become stable. So when real challenges come, they collapse. Not because they're incapable, but because they're untrained. So if you want to build discipline, you have to lean into pressure, not recklessly, but intentionally. You have to expose yourself to difficulty, gradually, consistently, because that's how strength is built. Now take a moment. Think about a recent situation where you felt pressure. How did you respond? Did you stay or escape? Did you act or delay? Did you follow your standard or your emotion? Because that moment is a reflection of your current discipline. And the good news? You can improve it. One response at a time, one decision at a time, one moment at a time. Because discipline is not built in theory. It's built in reality, in real situations, in real discomfort, in real pressure. That's where it becomes permanent. Now let me leave you with this. Pressure doesn't break disciplined people. It reveals them. So the next time you feel it, don't run, don't avoid, use it. because that's where your next level begins. But even if you learn to handle pressure, even if you stay consistent through difficulty, there is still something that can slowly destroy your progress without any external force. Something internal, something quiet, something that builds over time until it stops you completely. In the next chapter, we're going to uncover it. Chapter 11, The Slow Collapse, When You Stop Showing Up. There is a phase in discipline that no one talks about. It doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel like failure. It doesn't even feel urgent, but it is the beginning of collapse. It's when you slowly stop showing up, not all at once, but gradually. You skip one day, then another. Then you tell yourself, it's fine, I'll get back on track. But you don't, not immediately, because something shifts, not in your schedule, in your identity. Because here's the truth. Discipline is not lost in one decision. It's lost in the pattern of not returning. That's the danger, not the mistake, but the gap that follows it. Because missing once is normal. Life happens. Energy fluctuates. Things go wrong. But what you do next, that's everything. Do you return immediately, or do you delay the return? Because the longer you wait, the harder it becomes. Not physically, mentally. Because every day you stay off track, you create distance. Distance from your routine. Distance from your standard. Distance from your identity. And that distance creates resistance. So when you try to come back, it feels heavier, harder, more uncomfortable. That's why people say, I just can't get back into it. Of course it feels that way because you didn't just stop the habit. You weakened the identity behind it. Now here's where it gets real. Most people think discipline is about never failing, never missing, never slipping, never falling off. But that's not true. Discipline is about returning quickly, consistently, without drama. Because the faster you return, the less damage is done. But the longer you stay away, the more you reinforce the opposite pattern, avoidance, delay, inconsistency, and over time, that becomes your new normal. That's the slow collapse. Not visible from the outside, but powerful on the inside. Now let's go deeper. Why don't people return immediately? Because of emotion, guilt, frustration, disappointment. They think, I already messed up. So what's the point? I'll just start fresh later. And just like that, they extend the gap. But here's the truth. You don't need a fresh start. You need a fast return. That's the difference. Because waiting for the perfect restart is just another delay. But returning immediately, that's discipline. Now imagine this. You miss one day. Instead of judging yourself, instead of overthinking, you simply continue the next day. No story, no guilt, no delay. That's power. Because you protect the pattern. You don't let one mistake turn into a new identity. Now compare that to the opposite. You miss one day, then you skip the next. Then you delay the return. And before you know it, you're back where you started. Not because you failed, but because you didn't return. That's the difference. So if you want to build real discipline, you need to master one skill. Recovery, not perfection. Recovery. Because perfection is unrealistic. But recovery, that's controllable, that's trainable, that's powerful. Now let's make it practical. From this point forward, adopt one rule: never miss twice. That's it. Simple, clear. If you slip, you return immediately. No exceptions. Because one miss is a mistake. Two misses is the beginning of a pattern. And patterns are what define your life. so protect them. Now here's something important. Returning quickly doesn't mean going all in immediately. It means showing up, even if it's small, even if it's imperfect, even if it's not your best. Because showing up maintains identity, and identity is everything. Now take a moment. Think about something you stopped, a habit, a routine, a commitment. Why did you stop? Was it one mistake, or was it the gap that followed? Because that gap is where discipline breaks, and that gap is what you need to close, starting now, not tomorrow, not later, now. Because the longer you wait, the harder it becomes. But the moment you return, momentum begins again, quietly, but powerfully. Now let me give you a line to remember. You don't fall off track because you failed. You fall off track because you didn't come back. That's the truth. So come back, faster. Every time, no drama, no excuses, just action. Because discipline is not about never falling, it's about never staying down. And once you build that, you become resilient, stable, consistent, no matter what happens. But even if you master recovery, even if you always return, there is still something that can silently destroy your progress without you even noticing. Something internal, something that feels logical but holds you back more than anything else. In the next chapter, we're going to expose it. Hang on a sec. Write in the comments what you'd like us to talk about in the next video. We promise to read all the comments and pick the best and most relevant topics. Thanks. Chapter 12, The Trap of Overthinking. There is something that looks intelligent, but destroys action. It feels productive. It feels responsible. It even feels like progress. But it's not. It's overthinking. And it's one of the most dangerous obstacles to discipline. Because here's the truth. You don't stay stuck because you don't know enough. You stay stuck because you think too much and act too little. Let that settle. Because most people believe the opposite. They think they need more clarity, more information, more planning. So they analyze, they research, they prepare. But they don't move. And while they're thinking, time keeps passing. Opportunities move, momentum fades, confidence decreases, not because they're incapable, but because they're inactive. That's the trap. Overthinking gives you the illusion of control without requiring real effort. It keeps you safe, but it also keeps you stuck. Now let's go deeper. Why do we overthink? Because action creates uncertainty, and uncertainty feels uncomfortable. When you act, you risk failure, you risk mistakes, you risk being wrong. But when you think, you stay in control, you stay safe, you stay comfortable. That's why overthinking feels good in the moment. But here's the cost. Every moment you spend thinking without acting, you delay progress. And delay weakens discipline, because discipline is built through action, not analysis. Now here's the shift. You don't need to eliminate thinking. You need to limit it. Give it a boundary. Because thinking without limits becomes avoidance. So instead of asking, what's the perfect plan? Ask, what's the next step? Simple, clear, actionable. Because progress doesn't require perfection, it requires movement. Now imagine this. You want to start something, a project, a habit, a goal. Instead of planning everything, you take one step, just one, and then another, and then another. That's how momentum is built. Not through thinking, through doing. Now here's something powerful. Clarity comes from action, not before it. Because when you act, you learn, you adjust, you improve, you adapt. But when you stay in your head, nothing changes. So if you feel stuck, It's not because you need more answers, it's because you need more action. Now let's make it practical. The next time you catch yourself overthinking, pause and ask, am I thinking or avoiding? Be honest, because that question reveals the truth, and once you see it, you can change it. Now here's a simple rule. When you feel stuck, take action within 5 minutes. Not perfectly, not completely, but immediately, because speed breaks overthinking, and action builds momentum. Now here's something most people don't realize. Overthinking doesn't just delay action. It damages confidence. Because every time you don't act, you reinforce doubt. You tell yourself, I'm not ready. I need more time. I can't do this yet. And over time, that becomes belief. That becomes identity. That becomes your reality. So if you want to build discipline, you have to break that pattern. You have to act even when it feels uncertain, even when it feels incomplete, even when it feels uncomfortable, because action creates confidence, not the other way around. Now take a moment. Where in your life are you overthinking? Where are you delaying action? In the name of preparation? Where are you waiting for clarity instead of creating it? Because those areas are your opportunity, not to think more, but to move. Now, let me give you a line to remember. You don't need more time to think. You need more courage to act. That's the shift. That's the difference. That's discipline. But even if you stop overthinking, even if you start acting immediately, there is still something that quietly influences your discipline in ways you might not expect. Something tied to your energy, your body, your physical state. Because discipline is not just mental, it's physical. And in the next chapter, we're going to uncover how your body either supports your discipline or silently weakens it. Chapter 13. The body behind your discipline. There is something most people ignore when they talk about discipline. They treat it like it's purely mental, like it's all about mindset, willpower, focus, determination. But that's only half the truth, because your discipline is deeply connected to your body, your energy, your sleep, your physical state, and if your body is weak, your discipline will feel heavy. Because here's the truth. You can't expect strong discipline from a tired system. Let that sink in. Because this is where many people struggle without understanding why. They try to focus, but feel drained. They try to stay consistent, but feel exhausted. They try to push through, but feel overwhelmed. And they blame themselves. They think, I'm just not disciplined enough. But it's not always discipline. Sometimes it's depletion, because your brain is part of your body, and your body follows energy, not intention. So if your energy is low, everything feels harder. Focus becomes effort. Consistency becomes struggle. Discipline becomes force. That's not sustainable. Now let's go deeper. There are 3 physical factors that directly affect your discipline: sleep, movement, and input. Sleep is your foundation. If you're constantly tired, your decision-making weakens. Your emotional control drops. Your focus decreases. And suddenly, everything feels harder than it should. Not because you can't do it, but because your system is under pressure. Now, movement. Your body is not designed to sit still all day. When you move, you increase energy, you improve focus, you reset your mental state. But when you stay inactive, your energy stagnates, your mind slows down, your motivation drops, and discipline feels heavier. Now input, what you eat, what you consume, what you feed your system, it all matters. because your body uses that input to create energy, and energy drives action. So if your input is low quality, your output will be low quality. That's the connection. Now here's the shift. Discipline is not just about forcing action, it's about supporting action. Creating a system where showing up becomes easier, not effortless, but sustainable. Because sustainability is what creates long-term results. Now let's make this practical. You don't need to overhaul your entire lifestyle. You need to become aware. Start noticing patterns. When do you feel most focused? When do you feel most drained? What habits support your energy? And which ones drain it? Because awareness creates control. Now here's something important. You will still have low energy days. That's normal. That's human. But discipline is not about feeling perfect. It's about adapting. On high energy days, you push, you go deeper, you do more. On low energy days, you maintain, you show up, you do something, you don't disappear. That's the difference, because consistency matters more than intensity, always. Now let me give you a powerful shift. Stop asking, how do I push harder? Start asking, how do I support my energy better? Because when your energy improves, your discipline strengthens naturally. Now take a moment. How are you treating your body? Not what you say, not what you plan, what you actually do. Because your physical state is influencing your discipline more than you think. And small improvements create big changes. Better sleep, more movement, cleaner input. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be intentional. Now here's a line to remember. Discipline is not just mental strength. It's physical alignment. When your body and mind work together, everything becomes easier. Not easy, but easier. And that matters because easier is sustainable. Now if this is hitting you, don't try to fix everything at once. Start small. Improve one thing, just one, and build from there. Because discipline is not built in extremes. It's built in consistency across every area of your life. But even if your energy improves, even if your body supports your discipline, there is still something deeper, something internal that determines whether you stay committed or slowly drift away. Something tied to meaning, purpose, direction. Because without it, discipline becomes empty. And in the next chapter, we're going to uncover why purpose is the fuel behind everything you do. Chapter 14. Purpose, the fuel behind discipline. There comes a point where discipline alone is not enough. You can build routines. You can control your focus. You can manage your time. But if there's no deeper reason behind your actions, you will eventually drift. Because here's the truth. Discipline without purpose feels like pressure. Discipline with purpose feels like direction. And direction is what keeps you moving when things get hard. Now think about this. Why do some people stay consistent for years, while others stop after a few weeks? It's not intelligence. It's not talent. It's not even willpower. It's meaning. Because when something matters deeply, you don't need constant motivation. You don't need reminders. You move, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's slow. That's purpose. And without it, discipline becomes fragile because you're relying on external reasons, results, recognition, progress. And when those slow down, you lose momentum. That's why people quit. Not because they can't continue, but because they don't see why they should. Now let's go deeper. Purpose is not something you find instantly. It's something you build through clarity, through reflection, through honesty, because most people don't stop and ask themselves, what am I actually working toward? Not what sounds good, not what others expect, but what truly matters to them. And without that clarity, their discipline has no direction. It becomes random, unfocused, unstable. Now here's the shift. You don't need a perfect purpose. You need a meaningful one, something that matters enough to keep you moving, even on difficult days. Now ask yourself, why do you want to be disciplined? Not the surface answer, not to be better. Go deeper. Is it to build a life you respect? To create stability? To support your family? To prove something to yourself? To escape a version of your life you no longer accept? Find that reason, because that reason becomes your anchor. Now here's something important. Purpose doesn't eliminate difficulty. It gives you a reason to face it. That's the difference. Because without purpose, difficulty feels pointless. But with purpose, difficulty feels necessary. That's what keeps you going. Now imagine this. You're tired. You don't feel like showing up. Everything in you wants to stop. If you rely on discipline alone, you might push through, but it will feel heavy, forced. But if you have purpose, something shifts. You remember why you started. You reconnect with the reason. And suddenly, it's not just about the task. It's about what it represents. That changes everything. Now let's make it practical. Take time to define your direction, not perfectly, but clearly enough to guide you. Write it down. Say it out loud. Make it real. Because vague goals create weak discipline, but clear purpose creates strong commitment. Now here's another layer. Your purpose can evolve. It's not fixed. It grows with you. But the key is to always have direction, because without direction, discipline becomes random effort, and random effort leads to inconsistent results. Now let me give you a powerful shift. Stop asking, how do I stay disciplined? Start asking, what am I building? Because that question changes your perspective. It turns tasks into progress, effort into investment, discipline into purpose. Now take a moment. What are you building right now? Not what you say, what your actions prove. Because your daily behavior is shaping your future, whether you realize it or not. And if you don't like that direction, you can change it. Starting now, with clarity, with intention, with purpose. Now here's a line to remember. Discipline keeps you going, but purpose tells you why you must. And when those two align, you become unstoppable, not emotionally, but directionally. And direction is what creates long-term success. Now, if this is hitting you, don't just listen. Define something, even if it's simple, even if it's small, but make it real. Because once you have direction, discipline becomes easier to sustain. So, here's what I want you to do. Not later. Not after this ends. Now. Make one commitment. Small, clear, non-negotiable. And keep it. Today. Because that's where discipline lives. Not in big promises. In small follow-through. And if this journey resonated with you, don't let it stay as something you listen to. Turn it into something you live. If one line stayed with you, write it down. If one idea challenged you, act on it. If one moment made you think, use it. Because awareness without action changes nothing. And if you're still here, if you've stayed through this entire journey, that already says something about you. It means you're ready, not for motivation, for change, real change. So take that next step. And if you want to make it real, Leave a comment with one thing you're committing to, not for anyone else, for yourself. Because saying it makes it stronger. And if you know someone who feels stuck, who keeps starting and stopping, who needs this message, share it with them, because sometimes one message can change a direction. And if you're ready to stay consistent, to keep building, to become someone who follows through, then stay connected, because this is not the end, it's the beginning. Now, remember this one last time. Let it stay with you. Let it guide you. Let it define your actions moving forward. The life you want is built in the moments you don't feel like showing up. And you do it anyway. That's discipline. That's the skill that changes your life. And now, it's yours.